So I often debate people online about socialism, and I tend to see the same arguments crop up again and again from different people. Because of this, I kind of wanted to make a video going through, going through these recurring arguments. So hopefully, if you hold any of these views, you can see how they're refuted. By all means, feel free to refute them, refute the refutes. But yeah, I just thought would give the main arguments against these generic arguments against socialism. So quickly before we get into it, I just want to make a few definitions clear. You may not agree 100% with these definitions, but they're what I'm going to be going by. So if you want to understand my arguments properly, then just understand these and know that's what I'm referring to when I talk about certain things. So first off, capitalism is where the means of production is privately owned by a capitalist or CEO or something like that. State capitalism, or also known as National Socialism, honestly, I think there needs to be a better name for that whole thing, is where the state owns the means of production. Socialism is where the workers own the means of production, and wealth is distributed equally, as well as there being no private property. And then communism comes about after decades of successful socialism, and it is a classless, stateless, currencyless society. Right, so here's a list of all the different arguments I'm going to cover over. Don't really know where I'm going to be putting them in the video, but like maybe here or here, so yeah. Um, so you can just skip to each section in the video through the description if you just want to watch one specific thing, but if you want to see all of them, then just watch in order and we'll get to everything. So let's start with the incentive argument. So, you always hear the argument of if everyone's equal, or if there's no money, then there's going to be no incentive for people to do anything. No one's going to work. There's going to be no scientific progress, and it just won't. Everything will stagnate. So let's talk about that. So now I'm not denying that money is a good incentive, but it's not the only incentive, and there are other things that can do its job. So to give it an example here, did you clean your house at any point in the last, say, like month, or maybe your room or something, or maybe even just your desk? If you did, then you did it because you wanted it to be clean. You didn't get paid to do that. So this just kind of applies to all of society. People would clean buildings that they work and live in because they want them to be clean, not because they're going to get paid for it. And you may be thinking, who's going to dedicate their life to cleaning under communism? Well, no one is really, but they don't have to. The thing is, under communism, jobs kind of work differently than they do under capitalism. This one quote from Mark, I think, kind of sums it up quite well. In a communist society where nobody has one exclusive sphere of activity, but each can become accomplished in any branch he wishes, society regulates the general production and thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind, without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. So this pretty much sums up the whole no one will clean argument. People will clean, but rather everyone will have to do their part in it. So maybe some people will have that duty one week and then some different people the next week. The important thing here is that things are freely decided by the society on how to be dealt with because it's where they live and it's not for anyone else to tell them otherwise. If a society didn't want to ever clean, then they wouldn't have to clean, and that would be their choice. So another thing people say is that under communism no one will work because there would be no monetary incentive and it would not be mandatory. Now, the thing is with this is that communism's goal is actually to reduce work. Now, it kind of feels weird after growing up in a capitalist society being told your whole life unemployment is bad, we've got to reduce unemployment, we have to get as many people as working for as long as possible. Um, but, under communism, the general idea is we want as few people working as short as possible because, we want people to enjoy their lives and have leisure as much as they can. So one of the ways that a communist society would go about achieving this is through automation. Now, a lot of people may have heard about, the next revolution in industry coming up, and I'm going to make a separate video about this at one point. But basically, we're getting to that crucial point where it's going to be cheaper to just get a machine to do a menial task over and over than it is to pay someone a minimum wage to. Now, while this is a problem for capitalism that has to be dealt with, communism would embrace this, and it would essentially use the extra automation that you get from this to, keep as many people out of work as possible, and it would mean you wouldn't actually need as many people in work to begin with. Even though you don't even need as many people in work under communism, people are actually just still going to work, by their own choice. Now, you may be thinking, why is that? I hate work. Well, yeah, okay, I get that, but imagine you think of what you do in your summer holidays, when you were a kid, or if you are a kid now. Think what you do over that like 6 week period or however long it is for you. You sit there, you play video games, you browse the internet, and you just basically do nothing for about 6 weeks straight. Now this is great for about the first 4 weeks, but then the last 2 weeks you're kind of like, I'm kind of getting bored of doing nothing. Going back to school, I guess, wouldn't be that bad because it actually gives me something to do now. Maybe not everyone's like this, but eventually, if you extended it to maybe 12 weeks, people would get to that point. So the same thing kind of applies that if you're just at home, sitting around doing nothing, watching TV, playing games, eventually you're going to be like, I kind of want to go out and get a job now because, people want purpose in their lives. They want to actually do something, keep them occupied, have something to live for. And then this also ties in with the whole argument of, oh well, under communism I would just get the easiest job there is, and then I'd get the same living standards as the hardest job there is. But let's say you did decide to do that. Now, obviously, the whole argument of living standards for different difficulties of jobs, I think, is a different topic at the moment. But let's say you did do that. Can you really say that for your entire life you're going to be satisfied with just doing the easiest job that doesn't really have too much importance, and that at no point in your life you're going to think, maybe you should actually go out and like accomplish something, or actually do something with my life? Even if you specifically don't think you'd ever do that, I think most people will, just because it's like I said earlier, it's how we work. People actually want to do stuff at some point. Now, obviously it's nice to have breaks sometimes, but you can't have that break for your whole life. So lastly, with the incentive argument, let's get onto the whole innovation and scientific progress bit. So a lot of people think that without the prospect of getting rich from your inventions or ideas, that people won't want to actually, think of these inventions or ideas and build them up and focus on them. But I just don't think this is true. If you have a look at like the top scientists of history or the top engineers or whatever, then you'll see that they all do it because they love what they do. They love the science or the engineering. They don't do it just to get rich. I mean, I'm not saying getting rich wasn't a nice part of them for that, but whether the money was there or not, they would have still wanted to share their ideas and their creations with the world because, of course, it's their life's work and it's what they truly are passionate for. I mean, if you have a look at Tesla, he actually gave away all of its patents. These people would continue to exist and thrive under communism the same way they would under capitalism, or arguably they would be doing it better because they wouldn't have to worry as much about making sure they can eat and making sure they have a job for security and stuff. They could focus if people were truly passionate about physics or chemistry or arts or drama, whatever it is. They can properly focus on these things that they're passionate about because they don't have to be thinking, shit, am I going to have a job if I pursue my dreams here? So secondly, a lot of innovation under capitalism is actually held back in order to not crash the market a lot of the times. We can quite easily produce stupidly efficient engines, but because it would put millions of people out of jobs and mean people have to buy oil much less, we don't do it because it's not worth it. It would crash the economy and things would go to hell. But that's the system we live under. But of course this would never happen under communism because we don't need to worry about our market crashing. In fact, it would be great because it means we don't have to use as many resources. So lastly, I think I touched on this point before, that under communism I think we'd actually have even more people going into these innovative and scientific fields because they wouldn't be held back by having to worry about a job or other things like that. So currently, only those in first world countries that come from middle class backgrounds really go into STEM. And explaining this is going into sociology a bit. And look at the progress we made with just them. If everyone had the chance to get into these fields, we would advance a lot more quickly, if anything. Or at the very least, if you want to say there would be people who stopped innovating or making progress because there's no money in it, they would be replaced or maybe even outnumbered by the people that would go into it because they don't have to worry about having a job anymore. And then this applies to the arts and music and stuff as well. So it works on both, science and the other stuff. Humanities, is it called? You know what I mean. Let's talk about the second most generic argument about communism, is that communism only works on paper, or communism was tried in the USSR but failed. So let's start this off by just saying, yes, the USSR was an attempt at communism, and a lot of communists and socialists today would say it did not go well, and that's not what we would want. But instead of just saying, well guys, guess that's it for communism, everyone go home, show's over, why don't we actually analyze what happened and then see where we can improve, see where we can avoid making the same mistakes. I mean, when we come across problems with capitalism, we don't just go, well, that's it for capitalism, everyone, better find a new ideology. No, we just try to see how we can fix these problems and make it better. Just have a look at the progress we've made in capitalism alone in the last 100 years through worker conditions or, getting the poor out of, poor situations. Now, obviously, I still don't think that capitalism does or could ever work as well as communism, but I am willing to admit it's better than it was 100 years ago because we try to improve capitalism instead of just going, this is a problem with capitalism, let's just get rid of it. So obviously we would have to do the same with communism. When we find problems, we would improve them, and then things would be a lot better. I also just want to quickly throw in, socialism isn't actually unique in requiring revolution to come about. Capitalism actually properly started in England when the Civil War was run by Oliver Cromwell, which ended feudalism. So, most new ideologies, most major changes in ideologies actually come about through violent revolution. So, a lot of people call socialism extreme because it calls for violent revolution, but if anything, it's just the same as any other ideology. But anyway, let's talk about the revolution in the USSR and why it didn't really go to plan. So every country that's ever attempted communism has always come out of a ravaging revolution or civil war that's left its populace without any real structure. And they normally have just come from poverty or major oppression because, well, without those things in the first place, you wouldn't have had a revolution to begin with. So basically, things are very difficult to control and make sure things kind of go right. Add to on top of this the fact that now Western countries that don't want communism to structure itself are going to be putting pressure on you when you're already trying to deal with your own problem. I think that really any system trying to establish itself in these conditions is going to have a hard time and most likely fail. I think that any system trying to establish itself in these conditions would have failed and fallen into something that was not quite intended. So while this was an attempt at communism, it's not communism's fault. I mean, just imagine for a second if the roles were reversed and you had a capitalist revolution trying to establish itself under a socialist state, and then you got a bunch of other socialist states trying to put pressure and stop that capitalist revolution from happening. Obviously, a capitalist revolution is absurd to me, but you get the analogy. But let's talk about what happened exactly in the USSR for a moment. So, shortly after the revolution, after a couple of years, Lenin, the actual leader of the revolution, and one of the biggest spreader of communist ideas at the time, he died. So due to this, there was kind of a huge power struggle, and then it allowed Stalin to just kind of waltz in and take control there. And the way that Leninism works is that after the revolution, you set up a vanguard party, which is meant to transition from capitalism into socialism. So what Stalin did is he essentially kept it in the state capitalism phase for the duration of the USSR to keep in power himself. Now, a lot of people say that had he crushed the American oppression or something, opposition rather, he would have then stepped down, but I don't really think we have any evidence for this, and even if it's true, I think it's quite unlikely to get to the actual point where you would have worldwide communism under Stalin, but that's a completely different topic. So obviously this is a flaw in the way that Leninism is meant to work, and I think it's something that needs to be addressed and thought about properly, by the time of the next revolution, whatever that's going to be. But it's good that this has happened in a way because now we can see what went wrong and we can see how to improve it so it doesn't happen again. I mean, the whole thing of mistakes are meant to be made, or it's okay to make a mistake as long as you make it once, something like that. It applies here. Hey, so last point of this video, we're going to be going over human nature. So let's do this. So I just want to make something really clear here. Human nature does not exist. Have you ever noticed how in some cultures it's considered moral to cut off someone's hand if they steal, but others it's not? This and other examples prove that morality is not consistent or objective. And the same also applies to human nature. People act and think differently based on material conditions that they're brought up in. So in capitalism, we're taught to get ahead and be successful, you have to look out for yourself and focus only on your own well-being. Are you surprised that people then assume that it's only natural for people to act this way, if this is the only way they ever get to see people act? Under communism, there'd be less emphasis on these things and more emphasis on others, making humans act differently. I'm not saying greed would be completely eliminated from the human psyche, but it would be much less of a predominant thing. So thanks for watching the video, and hopefully you learned something. I would love some feedback from capitalists and socialists alike about what I've gone through here. So yeah.